impacts of COVID-19. There are many. I want to highlight a few. Again, an opportunity to talk about fear and anxiety that this whole process, this risk, this threat, this experience has visited upon us. I want us to get thinking about our social connections because they've been disrupted, and that has an impact on our nervous system. And finally, as we count the cost as to the load that's been put on our nervous system, to take a look and see, has our thinking become maybe less flexible, less hopeful, less able to learn? So from the COVID threat response, I want to make a distinction. A fear response. Fear response is an emotional response to an identifiable threat. If someone were to release a bear into this room, we would have a fear response. One of our systems would kick in, our sympathetic or our fight system would kick in, and we would react. Fear response, though, often can activate an anxiety response. Anxiety feels kind of similar. It's an unpleasant sensation. And anxiety, and this is my big learning, anxiety actually propels us into action to try to suppress the threat feeling. And that can be great if we need to put it aside, like in a talk like this. It can be unhelpful if we actually suppress or don't take a look at, try to discern what the threat actually is. So there's the fear response. At the same time, I can't think of anyone who I've talked to who hasn't become very aware of how our social contacts, different folks in society, what different groups are doing in response to or not doing in response to COVID. And that has an impact on us. Finally, as we all process this strain together, I think we're susceptible to what's called negative emotional contagion. And don't get fooled off by the fancy phrasing. Basically, it's important for us to once in a while take stock and think, what am I carrying emotionally in my nervous system that actually doesn't belong to me? If you have a gab session with someone or you're watching, this is actually really clear in my clinical practice. People come and talk about feeling overwhelmed and burdened on a regular basis with COVID. We get into looking at their media consumption patterns, and they talk about regular engagement in all sorts of media. What happens is that the negative emotions contained in those types of stories, human interest stories, end up being absorbed into our own nervous systems, and they become part of the work that we have to do as far as processing or not, right? Carrying the strain of those. So one way to deal with negative emotional contagion might be to ask yourself, what am I carrying emotionally that actually maybe doesn't belong to me? I've given full days of talks on negative emotional contagion. So let's get into another a look at your own potential symptoms in response to the threat of COVID-19. This isn't very fun, is it? We're sort of getting loaded in all these negative symptoms, but stay tuned. I'll just have you read them. We hear in the news almost daily fatigue. We see in news stories that people are less gracious with each other. Of course, I've identified anxiety and fear. Now, here's another chance for us to take care of our nervous system as we're doing this assessment. I'm going to give you the Graham special. This one's been with me for a long time, and it goes like this. The skill is called Drop 3, and I want us all, or you can just wait until we're done, but anyone who wants to start by just slowing your breathing down. And just notice even how doing that impacts this load on your system that you might be now becoming more aware of. Keep breathing nice and slow. Now, on your next out breath, I want you, remember it's called Drop 3, to drop your jaw. Just notice the tension that you carry in your jaw. On your next out breath, drop your shoulders. Again, we're coming at addressing the nervous system strain. And remember what we said before, all of these all these systems overlap. And learning to relax our nervous system can actually begin to have an impact on chronic pain. Now, don't forget the third drop, and that's the stomach. So one last long breath, excuse me. Breathing out, letting the stomach relax. Now, you may find that this actually begins to activate a relaxation response, or you may not. Either are possible pathways through addressing calming the nervous system. Important to find that out. I would love to spend lots more time on that, but I think we need to keep going. To our social contacts. Research, especially with PTSD, but in general with emotional health conditions, has really reiterated the fact that we need positive social responses. And they're not just nice things to have, but they actually allow us, especially when there's warmth, care, eye contact, touch, they allow us to manage emotional symptoms together as a group. And I heard a story of a patient the other day who was looking to reach out to his group, went to go visit, expecting just to see the parents in the safe 10, in the safe 10, and found a whole group sitting outside. So this is someone who was longing for connection, went to see his people, and found out that there was a big group, and so he was put in a threat situation where he had to decide whether, do I want to even get into this group? Can I? Is it safe? What's the risk? So he ended up leaving. So intellectually, we all know that we need relationship. I think a potential byproduct of COVID is that being in relationship has increased risk, and it's decreasing this insulating factor of holding on tight to our positive social responses. A quick word about psychological flexibility. Strain on the nervous system impacts our brain's ability to hold multiple ideas, to consider multiple perspectives. And I've written up there, and I could spend a long time on this too, the idea of the window of tolerance. We function best inside a window of tolerance where we're connected to ourselves. When we get outside of the window of tolerance, that's when a different part of the nervous system kicks in, and we become oriented to survival reactions. An antidote to psychological inflexibility is to practice just noticing and seeing how am I doing with holding multiple perspectives. This slide is meant to just show you what we're shooting for as far as optimal performance when it comes to level of arousal, the level of strain on our nervous system, and how well we perform. And right down the middle, you can see there's an optimal level. But if you aren't, go back to that initial slide, if you aren't practicing paying attention to and caring for your nervous system through different techniques, and in a minute we'll talk about emotional self-care, we move from the optimal level to very easily moving into the stress, anxiety, and panic levels, and our performance goes down. Our ability to think, learn new skills, consider multiple pathways, do emotional work that helps us work through our pain limitations and begin to start to explore new ways of being in our bodies and new ways of finding meaning and purpose again. Those are compromised. We've defined these, but just a couple more. Remember that fear is one of 7 core emotions, and it's switched on automatically. It comes in response to risk. Anxiety is a stop response. So it feels like fear, but it pushes us to actually try to get rid of the feeling. You can see these two lists and where there's the overlap. And both of these will negatively impact chronic pain. So an important relationship, again, people ask, well, why would you see a psychologist when you are trying to treat a pain condition? A lot of wisdom has really come to the fore around the mind-body connection, and we can't separate pain and our experiencing of pain. And so pain and anxiety coexist, and they can mutually make each other worse, or they can mutually make each other better. If we can't decrease anxiety symptoms, and again, if we're thinking that anxiety is like a fear response that we try to get rid of, looking for what it is that we actually think is a threat, doing the drop 3 breathing, working on mindfulness, challenging what our body is telling us around, is there really a risk of danger here? Or is this my alarm system that's just stuck on, and I'm going to need to learn to slowly hijack my brain to change that? We can treat anxiety, and it makes a big difference as far as how we manage pain.